Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel where real English meets real stories that move your heart and stir your soul. Today, we bring you a tale unlike any other, raw, emotional, and deeply human. It's more than a biography, it's a reflection of life itself. A story of fame and failure, of love and heartbreak, of silent battles and unforgettable strength. This is the life of Marlon Brando, a legend not just of film, but of feeling. Marlon Brando was born on April 3, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska. His childhood was turbulent. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was cold and domineering, while his mother, Dorothy, struggled with alcoholism but inspired his love for acting. The young Brando, often rebellious and misunderstood, was expelled from several schools. Sent to Shattuck Military Academy, he found a love for drama but never fit into the disciplined environment. His early emotional wounds and sense of abandonment would later fuel his intense performances. In 1943, Brando moved to New York City to study under Stella Adler at the Actors Studio, which emphasized method acting, drawing on deep personal emotions. This training became the foundation of his craft. Brando immersed himself in the theater world, waiting tables and sleeping in cheap apartments, refusing to accept roles he didn't believe in. His dedication and raw talent stood out, and soon, he was cast in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway. His portrayal of Stanley Kowalski stunned audiences with its animalistic intensity and redefined acting in American theater. Brando transitioned to film in the early 1950s and reprised his role as Stanley Kowalski in Elia Kazan's 1951 film adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire. It was a turning point in American cinema. He followed it with iconic roles in Viva Zapata, 1952, Julius Caesar, 1953, and The Wild One, 1953, where he embodied the rebel biker persona that became a cultural archetype. In 1954, he delivered a masterclass in acting with On the Waterfront, earning his first Academy Award. His line, "I could have been a contender," became immortal. Brando was now Hollywood's brightest star, handsome, brooding, and supremely talented. Despite his success, Brando grew disillusioned with Hollywood. He felt typecast, misunderstood, and used. The media hounded him for his unconventional lifestyle. He had affairs with numerous women and fathered multiple children, sometimes outside of marriage. He bought an island in Tahiti to escape. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Brando's films began to flop. Mutiny on the Bounty, 1962, was a troubled production. Brando was accused of being difficult and arrogant. His personal life and professional choices made him a controversial figure. Hollywood turned its back on him. The 1960s were a dark period. Brando's box office draw faded, and he became known more for scandals than performances. He gained weight, appeared in forgettable films, and was written off by critics. Personally, he faced immense hardships. His marriages ended in turmoil, and he struggled to connect with his children. He was accused of abandoning his career for self-indulgence. But Brando remained defiant, saying he acted for meaning, not money or fame. He refused to conform, even if it meant isolation. In 1972, Brando made one of the most remarkable comebacks in film history. Cast as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, many thought he was a risk. But Brando transformed the role with gravitas and tenderness, delivering one of cinema's greatest performances. He won his second Oscar but famously refused it in protest of Hollywood's portrayal of Native Americans, sending Sachin Littlefeather to decline the award. It was both a political statement and a demonstration of Brando's moral convictions. He was back on top, not just as a star, but as a cultural force. Brando followed up with another legendary role in Apocalypse Now, 1979, as Colonel Kurtz. However, the production was chaotic. Brando showed up overweight, unprepared, and clashed with director Francis Ford Coppola. Yet, despite everything, his performance became a haunting portrayal of a man lost in war and darkness. It mirrored Brando's own inner turmoil. He was brilliant but unpredictable, revered but feared. His power as an actor was undiminished, even if his methods became erratic. The 1990s brought immense pain. In 1990, Brando's son Christian shot and killed his half-sister's boyfriend in a case that made headlines. Christian was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 1995, Brando's daughter Cheyenne, plagued by mental illness and depression, died by suicide. Brando was devastated. These tragedies aged him rapidly. He withdrew from public life, growing more reclusive. He reportedly blamed himself for his children's suffering. The man once considered a god of the screen was now a grieving, broken father. Brando's later years were marked by obesity, legal battles, and rare public appearances. He took occasional roles, such as in The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996, but they lacked the impact of his earlier work. However, Brando remained a towering figure in cinema. He mentored young actors, spoke out on political issues, and criticized Hollywood's excess. In interviews, he revealed a deep sadness, a longing for love, and regrets about his relationships. Yet, he also spoke with clarity about life's truths. He embraced Tahiti as his spiritual home and remained philosophical until the end. Before Brando, film acting was often theatrical and exaggerated. After him, it became intimate, emotional, and real. He redefined masculinity in cinema, showing that men could cry, tremble, love, and ache. Without Brando, there would be no Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, no Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, no Joaquin Phoenix in Joker. Every time a modern actor delves into a tortured soul, whispers instead of shouts, or plays against type, they are borrowing from Brando. His performance as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, 1972, is considered by many the greatest of all time. But equally important were his brave flops, where he tried experimental roles or politically charged films. His 1963 film One-Eyed Jacks, which he directed himself, and Last Tango in Paris, 1972, still spark debate and discussion. Brando's life wasn't just defined by acting, it was driven by moral conviction. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr., supported the civil rights movement, and refused his Oscar in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. He also opposed the Vietnam War and spoke out about colonialism, racism, and injustice long before it became fashionable in Hollywood. Though not perfect, he could be volatile, aloof, and contradictory. His intentions were always rooted in empathy. He understood pain intimately, and he used that understanding to fight for others. To this day, Brando is more than a man. He is a mythical presence in the history of art and culture. His face on a poster, his mumble, his slouched posture, his simmering anger, all communicate more than words ever could. He has become a symbol of the tortured artist, the misunderstood genius, the rebel with raw talent. Brando represents the idea that true greatness does not lie in perfection but in fearless expression. He taught the world that broken people can still be beautiful, that silence can speak louder than dialogue, and that vulnerability is the ultimate strength. Marlon Brando may have died in 2004, but in truth, Brando never left. His spirit lingers in every screen test, every stage performance, every method acting workshop, and every rebel character written by a screenwriter trying to find truth in fiction. His impact is woven into the DNA of modern cinema. At film schools around the world, Brando is not just studied, he is worshipped. His performances in On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, and The Godfather are required viewing for aspiring actors and directors. Acting instructors use Brando's scenes as case studies in emotional realism. His use of silences, body language, and internal pain are dissected like sacred texts. The Brando pause, those quiet moments when he'd look away, hesitate, or grunt instead of speak, became revolutionary. In an industry obsessed with dialogue, Brando proved that the soul speaks louder than the script. Directors often tell young actors, "Don't act. Be." That philosophy? It's Brando's. Though Brando didn't invent method acting, he became its living embodiment. His ability to draw from personal trauma and channel it into his characters changed acting forever. His performances were not acted, they were lived. This approach inspired generations: Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Daniel Day-Lewis, Christian Bale, Joaquin Phoenix, all carry Brando's torch. But his legacy in method acting is also controversial. His raw vulnerability led others to believe that suffering was required to create great art. Many young actors misunderstood Brando's genius, thinking emotional chaos alone could create brilliance. Yet Brando always insisted that acting came from discipline, not destruction. Brando's image remains iconic. His 1953 role in The Wild One, leaning on a motorcycle in a leather jacket, created a rebellious archetype still emulated today, from James Dean to punk rockers to Harley-Davidson ads. Vito Corleone's gravelly voice in The Godfather has been parodied endlessly, from cartoons like The Simpsons to political memes. You can see echoes of Brando in the intensity of Heath Ledger's Joker, the broken beauty of Timothée Chalamet's characters, the silence of Ryan Gosling's performances, and the anti-hero template of almost every HBO drama. He is everywhere and nowhere, a ghost haunting art through influence. Before Brando, masculinity on screen meant control, stoicism, and dominance. Brando introduced a new masculinity, sensitive, wounded, confused, angry, but tender. Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire was brutal and raw, yet vulnerable. Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront was ashamed of his failures but longed for love. Brando gave permission for male actors to cry, whisper, and break. Today's generation of actors who explore gender fluidity, emotional nuance, and internal conflict owe much to Brando's emotional bravery. In many ways, he helped open the path to inclusive storytelling, long before it became mainstream. Critics often call Brando the greatest actor of all time, not because he was flawless, but because he redefined the art itself. He broke the rules, changed the language, and built a new vocabulary of performance. Fans, meanwhile, remain fascinated with his contradictions. He was both deeply private and dramatically public. He craved intimacy but feared it. He could be generous and cruel, principled and reckless. He was a puzzle, a man who never finished explaining himself, and perhaps never tried to. The mystery is part of the myth. Marlon Brando didn't just act characters, he became symbols. And like all great symbols, he is interpreted endlessly. In the age of AI, streaming, and CGI, the hunger for real human storytelling is growing again. Brando's work remains a reminder of authenticity. Young creators revisit his films not for nostalgia, but for guidance. How do you say something true without words? How do you move people without pretending? Digital artists use Brando's face in deepfake experiments. Filmmakers use his performances as references for motion capture. He has even appeared in CGI form in Superman Returns. Yet nothing artificial can match the soulfulness he brought to the lens. Marlon Brando's story didn't end with death. It continues every time a young actor stands on a dark stage and reaches into their heart to find a character. It lives when a director chooses honesty over glamour. It breathes in every role that dares to be complex, broken, and alive. He once said, "An actor is at most a poet and at least an entertainer." Brando was far more than both. He was a mirror, a storm, a whisper, a howl. He was and remains a revolution. For much of his life, Marlon Brando remained a riddle. Publicly, he was the brooding, magnetic icon, unreachable, unknowable, untouchable. But privately, Brando was a man overflowing with letters, diaries, thoughts, and contradictions. The deeper you go into his private world, the clearer it becomes. Brando was not a god of cinema. He was a man who bled words, mourned silently, loved deeply, and carried a lifelong ache to be understood. Throughout his life, Brando wrote extensively to friends, lovers, and collaborators. His letters reveal a man torn between idealism and despair. In a letter to his lifelong friend Wally Cox, Brando once wrote, "There's a hole in my chest that the world can't fill. I have women, fame, success, but none of it means anything if you can't sleep peacefully or love without fear." His letters to his children were equally raw. To his son Christian, who struggled with addiction and violence, Brando pleaded, "You don't need to be me. You need to be free. Don't carry my burden, build your own story." And to his daughter Cheyenne, before her tragic suicide in 1995, he wrote, "I see myself in you and I fear it. But I love you beyond my ability to explain." If I fail as a father, know it's because I never knew how to be one. These letters, once kept hidden, paint a picture of a man who craved redemption but never knew how to forgive himself. Unpublished notes, thoughts on acting and humanity. Brando kept notebooks throughout his life, jotting down spontaneous reflections. Some were philosophical. Acting is surviving. Acting is hiding. Acting is revealing the truth while pretending you're someone else. Others were heartbreakingly human. I've loved many, but I trusted few. And sometimes, I wasn't even sure I deserved either. He wrote about politics, justice, and race with burning clarity. America doesn't want to see itself in the mirror. That's why we need movies, to reflect what's ignored. These fragments reveal Brando not just as an actor, but as a thinker, poet, and emotional cartographer. Conversations with close friends, humor and tenderness. Brando, despite his seriousness, had a playful and childlike side. He often played practical jokes on set. In a candid interview, Jack Nicholson once said, "Brando was a genius, but also a clown. He'd steal your lunch just to see you get mad. Then he'd hug you and talk about the meaning of life." In his later years, Brando would sit on his patio, feeding birds and playing with his grandkids, telling stories. A neighbor recalled, he would quote Shakespeare one moment, then make fart jokes the next. That was Marlon, wisdom and nonsense in one breath. Brando's interviews are filled with quotes that pierce the heart. The only reason I'm in Hollywood is that I don't have the moral courage to refuse the money. Privacy is not something I'm merely entitled to, it's an absolute prerequisite. The more sensitive you are, the more likely you are to be bruised. If you want something from an audience, you give blood to get it. These were not just words. They were wounds disguised as wisdom. Letters unsent. A glimpse into unfinished love. In a box discovered after his death, Brando had dozens of unsent letters, to lovers, friends, and even his mother. "Mother, I forgive you. I wish you could have seen the man I became, even if I never became whole." Another, never sent to a woman he once loved. "You saw the boy in me, not the star. That scared me. I ran. I always run." These letters, never shared in his lifetime, are perhaps the most powerful. They speak to Brando's deepest struggle, not with Hollywood or fame, but with connection, vulnerability, and self-acceptance. Marlon Brando's legacy cannot be confined to the screen. His private writings, scattered and honest, show that he was not merely an actor. He was a man searching, always searching, for peace, love, and truth in a world that asked him to pretend. His letters, his quotes, his unsent messages, they are all whispers from a man who once roared. He taught us that true art comes from wounds left open. That greatness is not being perfect, but being real. And in those quiet, fragile pages left behind, we find not just Marlon Brando the legend, but Marlon Brando the human. Behind the towering myth of Marlon Brando stood a man often haunted not by the characters he played, but by the roles he struggled to fulfill off-screen. Among the most difficult and emotionally turbulent aspects of his life was his relationship with his children. A complex, heartbreaking tale of affection, distance, guilt, and generational pain. Brando had at least 11 known children, some biological, others adopted. His home, particularly his private estate in Tahiti and his house in Los Angeles, was often a chaotic haven where love and dysfunction intertwined. While he provided for his children materially, emotionally he was fragmented, sometimes present, sometimes unreachable, his brilliance as an artist clashing with his limits as a father. Christian Devi Brando, born in 1958, was Marlon's eldest son with actress Anna Kashfi. Christian grew up amidst his parents' custody battles, media scrutiny, and his father's growing fame. As a child, he experienced instability, neglect, and confusion, struggling with identity and mental health. The most devastating moment in Brando's family life came in 1990 when Christian shot and killed Dag Drolet, the boyfriend of his half-sister Cheyenne Brando, at the family home. Marlon publicly stood by his son, even weeping on the witness stand, blaming his own failings as a father and condemning the toxic pressures of their world. Christian was sentenced to 10 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. Brando visited him often but later admitted, "I failed Christian. I gave him a name and a burden, but not the tools to survive it." After his release, Christian lived a turbulent life and died in 2008 at the age of 49 due to pneumonia. His life remains one of the most painful chapters in Brando's legacy. Cheyenne Brando, a daughter lost to silence. Born in 1970, Cheyenne Brando was Marlon's daughter with Tahitian actress Tarita Terapea, his Mutiny on the Bounty co-star. Cheyenne grew up idolizing her father but also struggling with abandonment. Brando, absorbed in his career and causes, was often distant. She described herself as the forgotten child of a famous man. After the death of her boyfriend at the hands of her brother, Cheyenne spiraled into severe depression, developed schizophrenia, and made several suicide attempts. She tragically took her own life in 1995, just days before her 26th birthday. Brando was shattered. "I don't think I'll ever understand the depth of her pain, and that haunts me." He later admitted that he had lost control of the family and considered his children's suffering his greatest failure. Miko Brando, born in 1961, became one of the few children who remained close to his father throughout his life. Miko worked as an assistant and bodyguard for Michael Jackson for many years but was always protective of his father's privacy. In interviews, Miko has often defended his father's choices, saying, "He wasn't perfect, but he loved us. He didn't know how to say it, but he tried in his own way." Miko was one of the few family members present during Brando's final days. When Brando passed away, Miko said his last words to him were simply, "Resnauded. You gave enough." Brando adopted several children, including Petra, Maimatai, Ryachua, and others from Tahiti and the US. He embraced a philosophy that family was not just about biology, but about responsibility, even if he struggled to meet that responsibility fully. Several children lived with him on his Tahitian island, Tetiaroa. He provided them with education and care, but rarely structure or discipline. Some later described their lives as idyllic but confusing, raised in paradise with a father who loved intensely but was emotionally erratic. Many of Brando's children have kept low profiles, avoiding the spotlight and guarding their privacy fiercely, a reflection of the instability and media frenzy they endured during their youth. Marlon Brando knew he had failed his children in many ways. In rare interviews, he opened up about it with painful honesty. "I was busy changing the world, acting, protesting, building things. But I forgot the one thing I should have been doing, being present." He blamed his childhood trauma, an abusive alcoholic father and a neglectful mother, for his emotional shortcomings, but he never used it as an excuse. In his final years, he tried to rebuild relationships, offer forgiveness, and seek peace. Despite the chaos, his children spoke of moments of warmth, playing chess, feeding animals, long conversations under the stars, and Brando's unpredictable sense of humor. These memories, though rare, were cherished shards of light in a life of heavy shadows. Marlon Brando's legacy as an actor is immortal, but as a father, his story is one of love clouded by absence and connection strained by silence. His children, some lost, some living, some distant, carry both the brilliance and burden of being his descendants. In the end, Brando's greatest tragedy may not have been a failed film or a missed award, but the heartbreak of seeing his own children suffer. And yet, even in that, he remains deeply human, flawed, hurting, trying. He was not just the father of modern acting. He was a father of children whose lives, like his characters, were shaped by longing, loss, and the complex beauty of love. Amid the chaotic noise of fame, lawsuits, family tragedies, and cinematic glory, there existed one place where Marlon Brando felt truly free, Tetiaroa, a private atoll in French Polynesia. Purchased in the 1960s, the island became his spiritual haven, his laboratory for dreams, and his escape from a world that never stopped watching. Tetiaroa was not merely a luxury retreat. It was the symbol of Brando's lifelong longing for peace, purpose, and connection to something purer than Hollywood. Brando discovered Tetiaroa while filming Mutiny on the Bounty in 1960. The film was grueling, but it changed his life forever. Not only did he fall in love with his Tahitian co-star, Tarita, but also with the land itself. When he first set foot on Tetiaroa, a ring of 12 pristine motus, islets, surrounding a sparkling lagoon, he was captivated. It was as if God had taken a handful of heaven and scattered it across the Pacific. He later purchased a 99-year lease on the island in 1967 from a local Tahitian family. It cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars, but to Brando, it was priceless. Brando didn't just want to live on Tetiaroa, he wanted to protect it, honor it, and use it to inspire change. He envisioned the island as a self-sustaining eco-village, decades before climate activism became mainstream. He imagined wind-powered electricity, solar technology, composting toilets, and sustainable fishing. The world is on a path to destroy itself. Maybe this island can show that it doesn't have to be that way. He consulted scientists, engineers, and indigenous elders. He asked marine biologists how to protect coral reefs. He wanted to build an ecological university where students from all over the world could study sustainability in action. Though many of these dreams were unfinished during his lifetime, they were rooted in deep empathy for nature and indigenous wisdom. Tetiaroa also became Brando's home, a place where he raised some of his children and shared tender moments away from the public eye. Locals recall him walking barefoot, feeding turtles, reading philosophy under palm trees, and paddling outrigger canoes with his kids. For all the darkness that followed Brando in life, Tetiaroa was his light. Friends described his personality on the island as joyful, generous, even playful. But pain still found its way there. After the tragic death of Cheyenne Brando, who was raised in Tahiti, Marlon became reclusive. The island that had once symbolized rebirth became a shelter for grief. "I came here to find life. But I also come now to remember the ones I've lost," he once confided to a friend. After Brando's death in 2004, the fate of Tetiaroa remained uncertain. But in the years that followed, his dream was partially realized. In 2014, the Brando Resort opened, an ultra-luxury eco-resort built with strict environmental guidelines. Solar power, seawater air conditioning, organic gardens, and coral reef protection are just some of its features. The resort has also partnered with the Tetiaroa Society, a non-profit dedicated to environmental research and Polynesian culture. Scientists now study rising sea levels and endangered species on the island, exactly as Brando had hoped. Though commercialized to an extent, the project honors Brando's vision of blending luxury with ecological responsibility. To Brando, Tetiaroa was not just real estate, it was a soul contract. He believed the land didn't belong to him, rather, he belonged to the land. He embraced Polynesian beliefs, learning their myths, rituals, and respect for nature. He once said, "Tetiaroa is the only place I've found where I can truly hear myself think, where I'm not acting anymore." It was not a performance. It was a prayer. In a life dominated by stage lights and stormy headlines, Tetiaroa was Marlon Brando's quiet poem. It stood for all the things he craved but never fully attained: peace, clarity, balance, and simplicity. He dreamed of using the island to prove that humans could live in harmony with nature. And while his time ran out, the island continues to whisper his hope to the wind. Today, as palm trees sway above crystal waters and turtles nest on white shores, Brando's spirit lingers, not as an actor, but as a man who sought peace and tried, in his own flawed way, to create it. The final act of Marlon Brando's life was not played out on a grand Hollywood stage, but behind closed doors, in shadows of solitude, amid failing health and lingering regrets. The man who once commanded the world's attention with a single stare now spent his days away from the spotlight, haunted by memory, silenced by illness, yet still burning with thought. These were not glamorous years, but they were honest. They stripped away the costumes, the awards, the voices, and left only the man. By the late 1990s, Brando's health had deteriorated severely. He suffered from diabetes, congestive heart failure, liver disease, obesity, and respiratory problems. Years of emotional stress, poor eating habits, and depression had taken their toll. Once lean and magnetic, he had become a reclusive figure, often confined to his home or hospital. Yet Brando's wit and sharp mind remained, often hidden behind tired eyes and sarcastic remarks. In private conversations, he still debated politics, questioned authority, and philosophized about death. His body was failing, but his thoughts were still defiant. People talk about my body. Let them. They can't touch what's inside. They never could. Brando rarely appeared in public during his final decade. He refused most interviews and declined major roles. Though deeply lonely at times, he chose seclusion as a way to protect himself from fame, from pain, and from the memory of those he'd lost. The deaths of his daughter Cheyenne and son Christian had left permanent wounds. He carried their absence like invisible scars. Friends said that sometimes he'd sit in his garden for hours, looking at the sky, whispering their names under his breath. He would tell visitors, "Everything I loved is either gone or dying." Despite his isolation, Brando wasn't entirely alone. Some of his children, especially Miko Brando, remained close and cared for him. A few loyal friends, including Michael Jackson, visited occasionally. Their friendship was odd, two misunderstood icons drawn to each other's silence. They shared hours together discussing art, pain, and fame. Brando saw in Jackson the same fragility that haunted his own children. He once told Jackson, "They will never know the real you, so you better know it yourself." As death neared, Brando became more reflective. He would speak of his films, sometimes bitterly, sometimes proudly. He rarely watched them but referred to them like lost friends. He reread books, kept a notepad of quotes, and frequently returned to Shakespeare and Dostoevsky. He was especially drawn to one phrase: "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Henry David Thoreau. He would quote it, then look away. In these years, he admitted his regrets, chief among them not being a better father, not loving more openly, not living with more balance. Yet he was not ashamed. Just human. The final goodbye. On July 1, 2004, Marlon Brando died at the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 80 years old. The official cause of death was respiratory failure from pulmonary fibrosis. Few were present. No grand funeral. No flashing cameras. Just silence. He was cremated, his ashes scattered partly in Tahiti's Tetiaroa Lagoon and partly in Death Valley, California, two landscapes that defined his extremes, beauty and desolation. There were no closing speeches. Just the earth and sea receiving a soul that had roared, wept, wandered, and whispered. Marlon Brando was more than a legend. He was more than Stanley Kowalski or Vito Corleone. He was a revolutionary, a recluse, a rebel, a father, a failure, and a seeker of truth. He was haunted by the world, yet hungry to change it. He fought for civil rights, loved the oppressed, criticized America's sins, and stared directly at the hypocrisy of Hollywood. He lived not to be worshipped but to challenge what we accept as normal, both on screen and off. He died not as a star, but as a man whose life was full of contradiction, fragile yet powerful, selfish yet generous, broken yet unforgotten. And perhaps that is why Marlon Brando still matters, not just because of what he gave to cinema, but because of what he revealed about humanity. His life, like the greatest performances, was flawed, but unforgettable. If you enjoy the video, please like, subscribe and share.